Oh, yeah. Yo, let's do this.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Michael Asquith from X Cultural. Thanks for joining today. Welcome to Amplifying Belonging in Global Corporate Cultures. Today's consumers yearn to be a part of a community. They seek out authentic connections to companies and brands that provide a powerful sense of belonging and emotional value. Studies show members of value-based communities are most likely to participate in brand initiatives and recruit others to join in the effort. But those same studies show that only 36% of values-based communities are actually connected to a brand. This is actually from Fast Company. Coincidentally, they're also doing something today on belonging, which I thought was very, very interesting. And I like this definition from Cornell University. Belonging is the feeling of security and support when there's a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member of a certain group. It is when an individual can bring their authentic self to work. When employees feel like they don't belong at work, their performance and their personal lives suffer, creating genuine feelings of belonging for all. It's critical factor in improving engagement and performance. It also helps support business goals. And so I thought this was a really good definition. And plus, I thought, especially with Mental Health Awareness Month, that this is extremely relevant. And I think it's important to mention that mental health benefits that come from belonging include, inclusion and diversity, and also supporting other movements out there like the gender neutrality movements, neurodiversity, accessibility, etc. So once again, welcome to Belonging in Global Corporate Cultures, and where I'm beyond excited to have a very special guest today. She's bold, she's fantastic, the one and only Shelley Brown. She's an author, artist, certified mindfulness teacher, storyteller, and keynote on belonging. Welcome, Shelley, and thank you for being here today. We're going to dive right in. So I just wanted you to be able to say hello, obviously, before we did.
Hello, I am so happy to be here with you, Michael. So honored. Hello, audience. I'm so excited to talk about my favorite topic and my highest value, which is belonging. So thank you for the honor.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right in, Shelley, with questions, and just because we have a lot to unpack today. But I was intrigued from the beginning with your whole persona from the start. You embrace much more than just being weird or strange for the sake of being weird and strange versus human beings that just express who they are as individuals. And at the risk of being a little or a lot different, deserve to be accepted for who they are. And I really emphasize with anyone who sometimes doesn't feel like they belong or that they're good enough. How much of this belonging and embracing this weird acronym can be taught to global leaders or multinational organizations? And what can be expected of them when they have a business to run with so many KPIs that they're monitoring?
Well, first of all, I do want to talk about the definition of weird. Weird means of strange or extraordinary character, odd or fantastic. So in essence, we are all weird, and the acronym stands for welcoming, engaging, integrating, risk-taking, and dynamic. And when we embody all of those things, no matter whether we're a leader, emerging leader, or anybody, when we can embody the WIRD acronym, that's when we can amplify this experience of belonging. So I think it's applicable to anybody in the world of work and outside of work, because we're all integrated human beings. We're all one person, whether we're working, whether we're not at work. So definitely something that everybody can begin to practice to make a big difference when it comes to amplifying the experience of belonging.
No, absolutely. And it kind of segues, one of the things I mentioned in your brief intro was that you're an author and you wrote a book called Weird Girl Adventures from A to Z. Can you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for that book?
Sure. So as for all of my life, I was pretty much the weird person in the room. At least that's the way that it seemed. And in terms of the world's definitions, I didn't know till later on that I was sort of a divergent thinker when I was surrounded by people who were more convergent thinkers. And I wrote this book because I believe that our weird is our greatest connection to each other. And it was sort of my own journey trying to figure out, how do I make my identity in this world just be myself and who I am, when so many of us, when we feel odd, when we feel different, we look at the world like it's the clothing store for our identity, where we're running around life trying to figure out who we are based on something outside of ourselves. And I think that almost everybody, because I've interviewed a lot of people and asked them about feeling weird, and nobody has ever said, sorry, not me, not weird. I think we can all trace back to these moments where we look around and look at ourselves and we're like, I am weird, I am odd, I am different. I don't think there's anybody who has not felt that way. So that was the impetus for writing this book, because my greatest intention is that people would see themselves reflected in my stories and be like, hey, I'm not so bad.
No, absolutely. I think it's inspirational in that sense for sure. And on the cover of your book, as we can see here, it says, it's not a label, it's a lifestyle, which I personally love, by the way. And I don't think you'll mind me asking, but has this, how much of this is from your personal journey weaved into kind of this getting into belonging, and hearing your story a little bit about, maybe how it imitates life, or how life maybe imitates art.
It's really interesting, because before I wrote the book, I was speaking on mindfulness, and mindfulness not in the mindfulness for calm sort of a way, but mindfulness for being in control of your awareness, for being in the driver's seat of your awareness. And then I realized that by being in awareness and noticing your thoughts, that's one of the most important pieces of belonging. I believe that there's a belonging ecosystem, and I think Brene Brown will agree with me. It starts with us. It starts with our own ability to see the stories and the narratives that we live in that actually separate us from each other. And when we can notice those stories and those narratives and our judgments and our biases and what we bring to the party, we can actually get really super curious. And that is when belonging happens. So life definitely imitates art, because writing this book made it super obvious that this is my greatest and highest value.
No, I think that's fantastic as well. I think, you bring up a lot of different things there. You mentioned curiosity, which I think is absolutely a part of it. I think especially folks in the global business community, I think you have to be curious. We're dealing with people from all different walks of life, cultures, backgrounds. And that's the enriching, wonderful part of kind of that digital universe where we get to kind of, meet each other and get to know each other better and stuff like that. And then I always think of openness too, and just how important it is, to create an environment that is open, so that everybody can be themselves or be their best selves and be genuine, and that kind of thing, bring up some great ideas and collaborate with each other. So I think that's great. How important has this been for your own sense of belonging, and where was it potentially missing for so many others from all kinds of unique backgrounds and cultures? Like where do you see that? If that makes sense, how important has it been for your own sense of belonging?
Absolutely critical for my own sense of belonging. And I want to touch on something that you just said, this piece about curiosity. We are so distracted in this world. I mean, that's such an understatement. And we don't practice curiosity, and curiosity is a practice. And there is nothing that amplifies the experience of belonging for somebody else as much as curiosity, because people want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want to be known. And it doesn't mean as their best selves, it means as themselves. So the
Yeah, that's a
intention,
good point.
yeah. So this intention of practicing curiosity, and again, I'm going to say both and, because it's being intentional about practicing curiosity about our own stories, narratives, biases, and judgments, so that we don't walk into a situation. And I have this saying, Michael, that life is not a game of Top Chef. We have this tendency when somebody makes a mistake 2 weeks ago, that every time that person appears in front of us, whether it's virtual, whether it's live, whether it's on Zoom, we make that person their mistake. It's like they walk into this room and we're like, you're your mistake that you made 2 weeks ago. And we put that roadblock into that experience of belonging for that person. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Shelley, just because I do think, people start to see each other as one-dimensional characters, and
yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
one-dimensional characters.
Yep. And this notion of integrating in my WI.E.R.D acronym, the way that we can impact people feeling integrated into a culture is when we stop making people's humanity about what they can do for us to help us get to our goal. So when we look at people in our work cultures as humans performing, and we make them a KPI, and we make them a measurement, and we make them data, we dehumanize them. And it's not saying that those things are not important, but it's critical that we integrate the whole human being, their personality, their perspectives, their preferences, their mental, physical, emotional health. All those things that make a whole integrated human being is also part of amplifying that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I don't think enough people kind of think of it that way as well. So I think that it's important that you state that like you did. It seems to me that this like mindfulness approach to actively create a sense of belonging benefits different people in a variety of different ways. And the imposter syndrome phenomenon immediately comes to mind. Do you feel being able to be your genuine self helps to silence some of the nagging internal doubts, build confidence and camaraderie amongst your colleagues, et cetera?
That is such a great question. And I love the giraffe on this slide. But the first thing that I think about with imposter syndrome is we're always going to, you use the word silence. I don't believe that there are certain things that we can ever silence. There are some things that are so ingrained in us when it comes to that self-doubt, when it comes to feeling like somehow imposter syndrome is going to go away or we can silence it. I think the trick is the trick is noticing it quicker so that it doesn't impair your ability to connect and be present. And it's saying, okay, this imposter syndrome is here, but I'm also right here. So it's being aware that it's there and doing it anyway. And I don't mean it like a Nike ad. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really because you can't always make things go away. I still have those times where I walk into a room and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so weird. Everybody's going to think I'm weird. Or I get on stage and I'm done and I'm like, who am I to be talking about this? We all have it. It's
Yeah.
just, can I be with it?
Yeah. Or can you kind of accept it and accept that in others as well? Not everybody has their, every day where they're on, so and maybe it's okay that we're not always on, so to speak. So I think that
Yeah.
you make a good point in that as well. And I think, the presence thing is really important. I struggle with that myself, staying present in the moment, even having this conversation, making sure we're listening, we're exchanging ideas, we're thinking things through and talking. Sometimes I think it's, a lot of people are not kind of sitting back enough and having those, those pauses that are so important as well. So no, I think that's great. One of the common theories around the causes for the Great Resignation, which everybody's seen in the news, many will call it the Great Reset, was that people during the pandemic became less tolerant of jobs and lives that didn't bring them some form of meaning and purpose and happiness. Ultimately, people view their time as limited and valuable, and they want meaningful work as a trade-off. This movement was actually predicted and coined by a psychologist, business professor at Texas A&M, Anthony Klotz. How would you explain the correlation between employees' need for more purpose and how it intersects with belonging?
Yeah, so I refer to the Great Resignation as the Great Reconnection, reconnecting to our own values, to what's important to us. And we've had the chance for the last few years to reconnect. I think it started before that, but I think that, the last couple of years have really shined a light on that. And I have done my own research on this, and people do want more purposeful and meaningful work. They want value alignment. They want organizations that support their well-being, and they want benefits to support their well-being. They want, more than anything, I think, a place to be able to share their opinions and express their opinions in a safe environment. And I think that they also want autonomy. And I think in the work culture, so often we want people to think like us, act like us, work like us, and we're not keeping preferences in mind, and we're not acknowledging people's gifts and talents. And so we end up setting people up for failure, right? Because everybody has strengths and weaknesses. And if we know somebody's stronger than us with something, isn't it great? We can step back and let that person shine. And if we know somebody has a weakness, instead of setting themselves up for failure, we can maybe look to somebody who has a strength in that area. So when we really, really know people and we can celebrate their gifts and talents, and we know people have strengths and weaknesses, then it will help people be able to be more authentic in the context of work.
Yeah, I agree. It's a culture of, I think perfection sometimes, and everything can't be perfect all the time. So I think it's important too, for extracting talents out of individuals. If you provide that environment, I've seen, firsthand how all of a sudden you see someone just, the light kind of goes off, or, in their eyes, and suddenly they're coming into their own. And it's just a fantastic sight to see, and so I totally understand and agree and like what you're saying as well, because I think you have to be kind of welcoming to all the human characteristics of each individual, and treat them as individuals rather than kind of grouping them together or stereotyping. So I think that's really, really important. So can you take us through any of, the storytelling, communications directed at just like when you do keynotes or you're talking to executive management teams, or you're really talking about or talking to the individuals themselves, which I imagine when you're speaking, you're talking to everyone in that sense. Can you just kind of maybe tell us a little bit about how that kind of goes, or the types of things that you prioritize when you're a keynote?
Sure. So thanks for asking. I do use a lot of storytelling because I think storytelling is a great connector. And one of my favorite stories, and I want to just share this before I go into the framework, I do share stories because everybody knows what it feels like when they don't belong, and everybody knows what it feels like when they do. So I don't think there's a lot of gray area with regards to that. But I had worked virtual for many, many years. And at one point I was craving connection, like this work family, a work BFF, a work spouse, happy hour at 5 p.m. on Fridays. And dropping me into an office environment, because I'm a huge extrovert, is kind of like dropping a clown into a funeral, because I love collaborating. I've always had this modus operandi of who can I make friends with today. So I go into this office environment and I'm like, hey, yeah, woo, super extra. And it wasn't welcomed. And
Yeah.
it wasn't appreciated. And within the first couple of weeks, I was literally put in a cubicle in the far corner of the office, like away from everyone.
Wow.
And it was not what I was expecting. And within a couple of weeks, I was literally my spirit was killed, and I literally left, and I didn't look back. And it turns out that everybody I'd met in the first couple of weeks left too within the first year. And I guess I inspired them, and they were just too afraid to speak up. And Michael, the point is, stifled teams will leave, or worse, they'll stay.
Yeah.
Hey, and
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I think it's funny that you mentioned the staying part, right? Nobody wants the toxic individual and in the situation. And then sometimes it is amazing that you hear the story that you just told, where you're kind of treated kind of in a strange way, which automatically just deflates you and takes away just your natural kind of beautiful characteristics that make who you are, right? And so
Right.
I think that it's completely on par, or with, I think anybody can understand how badly it feels when someone is stifling you or ignoring you or treating you differently because, their personality is different than yours, or whatever the case is. It's not conducive to a great working environment, but it also isn't conducive to great output. It's only going to make a lot of folks, not share their ideas, not share who they are, kind of retract back, backwards, and make sure that they don't, kind of, they don't bloom,
Yeah.
that's the sad part. So yeah, I hear you.
And I will say, this is not about letting your freak flag fly and be like a free for all. There
Yeah.
is the context of work. And so when I work with my clients, we talk about balance, because especially in an environment in hybrid where you're going in an office environment, there are extroverts, there are introverts. What if you make it so that there are times where it's a heads down time, and maybe have different spaces for the extroverts and different spaces for the introverts? Or maybe it's all, there's times during the day where it doesn't have to be a heads down time. It's balance. It's balance. It's not all about, I'm just going to be who I am, and it doesn't matter what the context. And the biggest part of that is the self-awareness of how you're showing up for
Yeah, I
other
think that, and I think you talk about that being the first thing, right? Is you've got to be aware of
people.
yourself. You got to be introspective. You've got to, be honest with yourself, even sometimes when it's difficult to do so. I think that's the part you play in the belonging as an individual. So like you said, it's a two-way street. I think with organizations, it's not just on the organization to provide the environment, without any kind of parameters or anything like that. So I think that's, an important kind of statement and differentiation to kind of what you're speaking about. So no, I agree with you. I think the other thing that I was thinking about a little bit as you were kind of going through some of those stories and some of those situations was that you mentioned introverts and extroverts.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point as well. Like, I don't think enough organizations and I'm an extrovert, so I'm going to say it, and I feel like I can say it, or I at least feel like people think I'm an extrovert primarily, right? So my point is yeah, they need to adapt to introverts better, because I've seen it again firsthand, where all of a sudden introverts aren't always so introverted if you kind of let them have the floor sometimes. You know what I mean? If the extroverts drown out the introverts, right, then they never get a chance to share their ideas or become leaders. And they can become leaders whether they're introverted or extroverted, if they have the right empowerment, so I think
Right.
that's very, very good. So any thoughts on that, or any more thoughts on that, just before I
Well,
kind of
it
move on to
just
a different question?
it's again, it's a matter of balancing humanity with what we need to do to remain profitable. And it's hard because there's so much pressure on leaders for making those KPIs and reaching those metrics. And sometimes we don't get in touch with who the people around us are. We just want them to produce, but unfortunately we're seeing people leaving because we're not taking the time to be welcoming, engaging, integrating, risk-taking, and dynamic. And again,
Yeah.
people want to be seen and heard. And it doesn't mean an hour every week. It means 20 minutes every 2 weeks. It means coming into a conversation with somebody and saying, tell me where you're stuck, because I want to help you get unstuck. It just means bringing some of that humanity back. And it also means bringing some boundaries back.
Yeah.
I don't know about you in this technological world. I don't know how often you get a text on a Sunday evening and you're like, and your heart stops and there's nothing you can do about it until a Monday. So I really think that just understanding people's preferences, understanding people's boundaries, having accountability and honoring these things is another way, are all ways to amplify this experience of belonging.
No, perfectly stated. So yes, no, and then can you, I kind of mentioned this, but the disciplines, behind this mindfulness approach, the philosophies and the theories, or is there any kinds of like specific thought patterns or ways that you're kind of influencing the need for belonging in global business culture, if that makes sense? Is there certain things that you take them through? Is there like there's no breathing exercises or anything like that?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny, Michael. So when I became interested in mindfulness, I came to it as a former ultra marathoner and certainly a corporate enterprise salesperson. And the thought of sitting there with my legs crossed, lighting incense and thinking about my breath was something where I was like, there's no way. That's for tea drinking yogis. Nothing wrong with tea drinking yogis. But I was like, how am I going to do that? And when I came to that practice, I absolutely fell in love with it because it just transformed my life so much. But I thought, how am I going to bring this to a bunch of skeptics in the
Yeah.
world who are like, no way, I'm not going to do that. People are so opposed to closing their eyes in front of a group of people, and yet they could be at the airport like sleeping and drooling. But so I came up with another way to help people practice this, and it's with rock music, actually, because it's all about practicing your noticing muscles. It's not about being calm. Being calm is a byproduct of it, but self-awareness is actually the foundation of what
Yeah.
results with the practice of mindfulness.
Yeah, no, so mindfulness with rock music. I
Yes.
dig it. I think it's a novel concept. I like it just because, like you said, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily like a quietness. Sometimes probably you need to do the opposite. Just to kind of get it out of your system, or just to show more who you are. So I think I think that's good. It's the old quote of, dance like no one's watching, so I like that.
Yeah. And the R of the W.I.R.D process is risk taking. So how can we expect our employees to take risks if we're not willing to take a risk. And the biggest piece of risk taking is vulnerability. And what stops us from being vulnerable? The thoughts inside our own head, the fear of the judgment or the self-judgment. We're too fearful of how we're going to appear if we let ourselves take the risk and be a little bit vulnerable. We're too afraid to break some rules when they could benefit people. We're too afraid to ask somebody that we don't know to spend some time with us and ask for help. So all of that has to do with our own narratives. So that's where
Yeah,
mindfulness
no,
comes in.
no, I love it. How much do you think, in I'm in the business of cultures and languages, how much does an individual's own identity and culture, do you think, play a part in that sense of belonging within a corporate culture? Have you thought about this at all? And you're speaking to audiences usually that are probably fairly diverse anyways. So I imagine you have to give that a little bit of thought. Does it change, if you're doing travel industry versus, something completely different?
I think it's, again, honoring people's individuality and whatever that looks like. And sometimes culture has a definite influence in the way people show up. So somebody from a quieter culture or certain cultural norms that dictate you don't talk about this with people you don't know or make them more shy or whatever it is, we have to honor those things because not everybody from every culture is coming to our culture and is going to be the same as us. It doesn't matter if it's cultural preference or individuality. We don't all come to the party with that same desire to be everything that we think somebody else should be. It's just a matter of our backgrounds and preferences and our own individuality. So it's critical that we understand where people are coming from.
Yeah, we can't be everything to all people or whatever, as they say. So I think that's right on. And I like that you're still going into these things and you're thinking about the audience and who you're talking to and realizing, hey, culturally, maybe, in Asian culture, as an example, might be a different approach, if you were speaking in, let's say, Asia. And by the way, Shelley is more than willing to get on an airplane and do a keynote at any particular time or for a virtual event at any particular time. So, but yeah, I think that's wonderful that that's a part of your thinking,
Yeah.
and and whatnot.
And thankfully, so many corporate cultures are starting to educate people so that we can get much better at cultural sensitivity. It's so critical in every single person's feeling of belonging, experience of belonging. And that's probably the biggest and most important thing is belonging is an experience. It's a felt experience. And so we come up with policies and we come up with strategies and we say, you belong here. But unless we align our behaviors with our values, it's just a sign, it's just a slogan, and we need to transcend that by our actions.
Yeah, 100% actions speak louder than words. So do you feel there's more of like a universal need with the objective of working towards a more fulfilling work environment, not only for mental health purposes, but also to extract the best out of each individual as part of that larger whole? And I imagine it at least leads to more engagement. Can you talk at all about engagement and how that kind of plays into belonging?
Absolutely. People who do not feel like they belong are not going to engage. I mean, it's as simple as that. And so this notion of the experience of belonging is getting more and more on the radar of organizations because people are disengaged and the engagement scores show it. The research shows it. And in terms of mental health and well-being, and that is so high on the radar for most organizations, and this experience of belonging, the feeling of not belonging causes stress. And there's some recent research from MIT that shows that we crave connection in the same area as we crave food, and that our brains experience social exclusion in the same area of the brain as physical pain. So here we are with a bunch of people that feel like they don't belong, and it causes that same experience of pain. And then what happens when we're in pain? We have fear and we have stress. And when we are stressed, we all know that our ability to learn, our ability to engage, our ability to retain information, our ability to remember things goes down significantly because our bodies are producing the stress hormones and we can't function well. So of course it's critical.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that you bring up the fact that it's comparable to, the extreme pain, and it makes it that much more important that individuals do feel like they belong, and that whether it's in communities or whether it's in the global business community, your local community or global business community, it matters. And I think that these are things that people take for granted a little bit too much, or they think that by showing those insecurities that makes the individual weak, when in fact it's quite the opposite. I find that when people are vulnerable and empathetic and all those things, it's a sign of strength. So I think it's so critical in so many different ways, and it crosses over into business and what we do, with user experience and working with companies on that too, so that they actually are able to personalize that user experience, for their end users, for their consumers, or whatever their product or service is. So, I think that's really, really interesting. And I think it's something that needs to be explored even more, just because it is so detrimental, I think, to the soul. So when it doesn't happen,
Yep.
so.
We're taught, sorry, go ahead.
No, Shelley, go ahead.
We're taught from a young age, and things haven't changed that much. We're taught from a young age that to be strong is to be the same, and to be different is something to be fixed. And then we bring that mentality into adulthood. We start drawing in cleaner lines in between the lines and more muted colors, and we bring that mentality into work. And fortunately, it's getting less and less, but it is still that mentality that somehow being the same is the way to be, and that being different is something that's shunned, something that is for those creative people. And we don't allow the divergent thinkers, we don't allow the people that think differently to be the drivers of the innovation, the creativity, the originality.
100%. I think it's, you have to have that resiliency, right? But I think that there's no reason why people have to be always so resilient. You always hear about all, the stories of all the stuff someone had to overcome in order to kind of get to the place that they are. And yet, wouldn't it be nice if they had it just a little bit maybe easier? Maybe they would have been embraced a little bit more. Maybe they would have even done greater and bigger things, So I always think about that kind of stuff as well. And then you think about all the shy folks out there, creators and creatives out there that you never get to see their work, or you never hear their ideas because they never were put in that environment in which to do so, So it's, I think it is a travesty in that way, for sure. So just to shift gears a little bit before we kind of get to some questions, because I know I have seen some questions from the audience, which is great. But do you think these global business changes, out there going on, account for the uptick in belonging awareness, to put some emphasis on the adjustments organizations should make to put their people front and center to ensure that they get the most out of them? And has it been this period right before the pandemic that made you aware of this need? Because we all went through the pandemic. We all know how kind of alone at times it felt. So I'm just kind of curious, how that kind of came about for you. And is that what kind of inspired you, or was it shortly before the pandemic? All those things.
Yeah. I definitely think for me, it was before the pandemic, and I've certainly, worked with organizations about how do we show up better together before the pandemic, because that's what makes culture. How do we show up together? And culture has always been a topic that's been critical. It's always been so important, because who helps your business run? It's the people. And the pandemic amplified this notion that belonging should be a topic. But isn't that what culture is about? It's that connection to each other. So again, the pandemic
but there wasn't really that connection during that time, right? So you had to
No.
find different ways to connect, right?
Right, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And I totally think that you can have the experience of culture when you're not in person all the time. And it takes a lot of intention, because there's certainly a lot of companies that are not going to go back to in person. There's certainly a lot of companies that are going to be hybrid. There's some companies that are going to remain remote, and you can still create culture and belonging and connection and engagement without being in person. And I never thought that I would say that. But again, it's kind of puts this conversation full circle. It is the intention to help people feel seen and heard and understand your values as an organization, have transparency around the way decisions are made, and allowing people to have a voice. And of course, the affinity groups and the ERGs and all those things are important too. But it is doable if we have the intention to create these types of connection with other human beings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think we all hopefully learned a lot throughout the pandemic. I know that I did and very much did, and try to extract the best out of it, I guess, from a bad situation. But it also made and forced us to kind of learn how to communicate and work with each other in different types of ways.
Mhm.
And I think too, it showed too that it's important to check in on folks. I remember specifically very much many people who were very kind during the holidays, who knew, that first kind of holiday period after the pandemic started, that there was a lot of people, maybe they didn't have their families around, or maybe they obviously couldn't see their families because at the time nobody knew what was going on enough. So I think it was like, okay, but this person's alone, I know
Yeah.
they work, but they're alone. And just, hey, if you need anything, let's have a drink, or let's meet after work or whatever. So I think all those things are still important, or probably even more important in the world we are in today. So I can't stress that enough. So I think it goes without saying. Go ahead, Shelley.
I think one of the most important pieces that we need to incorporate for belonging is fun. And it could be deep fun where we're all working together towards a common goal or project, where you're like, I'm so passionate about this, and you're on board with it, and that can be fun. And there could be another kind of fun where on a Friday you decide that you're going to have everybody get together for 20 minutes on Zoom, and you're going to interview another employee about and ask like funny questions to get to know them a little bit better, or somebody plays a song. And this actually comes from somebody I know who incorporated this. He's a VP and incorporated this Friday afternoon kind of fun thing where somebody introduces a song, somebody interviews somebody and asks them these crazy questions, and then that person picks somebody else to interview if they're on board with it. 20 minutes on a Friday to have some fun. It's really important in cultures.
Yeah, no, 100%. Fun is always important. And then the last question, just before we take questions, is there an acceptable level of belonging versus too much or too little?
That is
Is there a
such a
place where you draw the line, I guess?
That's a funny question. Like we talked about, belonging doesn't mean fly my freak flag. I'm just gonna, emote like crazy. I'm going to express my anger like I'm putting together some IKEA furniture. It doesn't mean I am unfiltered. I am just me and I'm just spilling it out all over. Again, there is no such thing, I think, as too much belonging. But what I do think is that every company, every culture needs to define the context of what is acceptable behavior. And again, that starts with that self-awareness piece.
Yeah, no, I believe that that's totally the case. And when it comes to cultures, and belonging and inclusion, and diversity, it's got to go deeper than the demographics. So,
Yep, sure.
absolutely. So yeah, no, I think, it's great having you on X Cultural today, powered by Vista Tech, and I really appreciate Shelley hearing you. Everybody, you can check out Shelley's book on Amazon. I know it's there, so that's fantastic. It's got amazing reviews as well. So I encourage anybody to take a look at that kind of coming of age kind of story. And yeah, let's take some questions. One from the audience was, would love to know more about mindfulness with rock music. How does that exactly work?
You're gonna have to hire me for that one. I have a whole half a
You
day
can't give away
session
the secret
on that.
sauce. Yeah, that's the secret sauce.
I'm actually okay sharing a little bit about it. And thanks. And by the way, people, thank you for the chats and stuff. I haven't been watching on the chats, by the way, because I want to be able to focus on my conversation with Michael, but thank you for chatting. So what it involves is choosing an instrument in a song and focusing your awareness on the instrument, knowing that you're going to get distracted, because it's the same as focusing on your breath, right? You're going to get distracted by a thought. You're going to get distracted by the door, somebody at the door. You're going to get distracted by whatever. But knowing that the breath is there, it's the same with music. Knowing that that particular instrument is always there for you to come back and focus on, it gives you sort of that anchor for awareness. And I think it's a lot more fun than focusing on my breath, but that's just me. So next time you want to practice, pick one of your favorite songs, choose one instrument and focus your awareness on that instrument. See if you can isolate it, and everything else kind of becomes background noise. And still
No,
hire me
I
to
think that's
speak
cool.
about mindfulness at your company.
Of course. No, I think that's a cool exercise. So thank you for sharing that. And then I know we had another question was, any tools or tips on how to encourage people to take risks without them having to feel or worry about being vulnerable?
Go first. If you want to, thanks for that question. It's a great question. The easiest way is, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, or whoever you are, your willingness to go first is what's going to open that door for somebody else. And certainly if somebody has something, a struggle or something that you have experience in, think about not taking that risk. Think about what that effect of you not taking a risk when you have something that could help that person suffer less and you don't say anything. So
No, I think that's awesome, Shelley, too, because the go first situation is yes, if you're comfortable, lead, pave the way for somebody who might not have the ability to do so quite yet. And I think that's also plays into when you're exchanging or speaking with others to sometimes provide them with a personal story about yourself so that they feel more
yeah.
comfortable to be themselves as well.
And you just said, if you're comfortable, go first. You don't have to be comfortable. Go first.
Yeah. I don't mean to be not that person. I meant the other person when they feel
Yeah.
comfortable. But yes, agreed, 100%. So I just wanted to see if there was any other questions. I'm just reading the comments. Comments are great. Thank you, everybody. But no, this has been fantastic, Shelley. I couldn't be more happy with the fact that you joined us today. And I encourage everybody to, feel free to reach out to Shelley any particular time. She can tell you more as well. She's on LinkedIn, of course. And no, we look forward to hearing and watching some fantastic updates from Shelley moving forward. So thank you again, Shelley, for having us. Oh, there is
Something else.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. What advice do you have for those of us who are divergent thinkers and embody intersections of diversity, yet find ourselves in a structure that's not prepared for us? How can we tap into our power within the limits of authority?
That is such an incredible question, because I found myself in that situation almost my entire career. And I was always able to find that one person who got me. I think it's hard when you don't have somebody who can champion that type of thinking, because then you feel really, really separate. And I think one thing to explore is it really people are not prepared for us, or is some of it our own stories and narratives? So the first step, I think, is we need to get curious about that. Like, is it really them, or is part of it us, part of our own fear? And I'm not saying that it's not just those authority people, but it could be a little bit of ourselves as well. Sometimes.
No, I think that's a good point as well, Shelley. I think in some of these cases too, I think you could probably find, if it's talking about diversity and maybe subcultures, I would think that too, and maybe clarify if I'm incorrect in what I'm saying, but I would almost say that you should find somebody who kind of has a little maybe similarities to you. So that way you can kind of start to feel more comfortable with how you can, share who you are, and share your ideas and do those types of things.
And unfortunately, there may be situations where it's really hard, and taking some risks so that you're not completely suppressed is going to help your well-being. And when you're completely suppressed with who you are and the way that you think, that is really detrimental. So again, a little bit of risk taking on your part. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, it's great. There is one more question. What advice do you have for individual contributors who notice gaps in leaders' self-awareness? This, how can we or how can companies encourage introspection in leadership? And I think this is awesome, just because it is really tough. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna go to somebody and be like, listen?
Yeah, can you act a little better? It is so hard, because I too was an individual contributor most of my career, because I was in sales, and I was in enterprise sales, and I actually was in the software world. And most of the people that I reported to directly, they were sort of the emerging leader level. And their whole thing was they were under so much pressure to make sure that quotas and goals and KPIs were being hit, that they didn't have the self-awareness really to treat me like a human being. And it's really, really tough, because I think it could be a little bit of risk taking, like to try to meet one-on-one with this person and be like, I'm just needing a little help understanding something or other, not in a, you need to do some work on your self-awareness, you need to show up better, but expressing your needs, being able to take a risk and express your needs a little bit.
Yeah, and I think remembering the fact that, just because people are out there, like people will ask a lot of times about public speaking or things like that. Like I tell them all the time, I'm still not comfortable a lot of the time. You know what I mean? I actually would be sometimes more comfortable. I used to play music and I'd be more comfortable on a stage singing than I would doing this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people don't always realize that everybody has some hangups and they have to overcome some of those things within themselves. But yes, if you have that encouragement, if you have those environment, you're more likely for those things to come out and for you to be able to take those risks.
It's
So
hard. We have to be able to advocate for ourselves. And sometimes we don't advocate for ourselves, again, because of fear. And are we willing to take the risk to advocate and speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, in a way that's thoughtful, in a way that is not pointing fingers, in a way that's not blaming? Because so often we expect work to be the be all end all of everything. And unfortunately, we're just a bunch of human beings doing human things, and it's human problems that are no different than outside of work that happen in work. So it's really finding a way to communicate in a way that's not placing blame.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Shelley, once again. This is Michael Asquith from X Cultural, and just urging everybody to stay safe, stay open, and grow silently. Thanks everybody who attended. Have a wonderful day, Shelley, and cheers to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yo, let's do this. Now, picture homie rolling.